Good morning, A&Pers. We've begun to cover the nervous system, and there are many components to it. So we're going to start out with a basic overview for our VoiceThread presentation here today. And we're going to talk about the organization of the nervous system and nervous cells, or neurons and glia, as well as nervous tissue. Providing you an overview. Nerves control everything, okay? They bring information in through your five senses. They send information out to power your muscles, power your salivary glands, power virtually every process of your body. Every organ system of your body is coordinated by the composer, which we're going to know as the nervous system, and specifically the central nervous system. And in lecture you'll recall perhaps that we referred to this as the computer processor of the brain. Is a computer processor. The central nervous system is the computer processor of the body. And then the spinal cord, that is an extension of the brain. That is like the circuit board. Important is that composer, it doesn't work alone. So there's the endocrine system, which we're going to learn about as our last order of business for this semester. The endocrine system produces hormones, which are chemical messengers, you'll come to know them as, and they, along with the nervous system, help to control every cell, tissue, organ, and system in the body. And here we have an image of some nerves doing their stuff. They're the larger gray-like structures with some activities happening, messages being sent. Looks like that wispy green, yellow smoke. There's blood vessels coursing through. We see some red blood vessels right here. And we've got support cells. So this is an overview of the nervous system. Every cell in the body is either directly or indirectly powered by this important system. And here we have, in this slide, a depiction of all of those organs kind of thrust out from the human anatomy. We've got the eyeball and the salivary gland, and we've got, looks like a blood vessel to me, more glands, more cells, the heart, the lungs, the stomach, the intestines, your digestive organs, the pancreas, all the way down to your urinary bladder and your reproductive system. So there are all kinds of nerves, large and small, that mediate function within these organs. Really, really important. So they make your lungs inflate and breathe and complete gas exchange, and they make your heart beat. Nerves power these things electrically. So how does it function? The nervous system's function is to maintain homeostasis. Again, imagine a composer of a symphony with their little wand, waving, coordinating the woodwind section over here, and the brass section, and the percussionists, and all of those processes need to be in balance, and that's what we know as homeostasis. Very, very important. As well as little feedback loops that we talked about, the negative and positive feedback. They happen via nerves. So nerves help sense changes in the body, and they interpret that information up here in the brain. And then they decide on what kind of response is going to result. And oftentimes, this is just automatic. We don't have to think about a response, right? Here's our example of we're touching a hot stove or a candle if you are Amish, or prefer not to use electricity. This is an example of integration. All right, the information that we have from the moment we burn our fingertip on a candle, maybe inside a spooky jack-o'-lantern. There's going to be a nerve that is going to power sensation, pain, and temperature. A pain and temperature nerve that's going to zoom back to the spinal cord, and it's going to process some of that information in this gray matter, in the sensory area of the spinal cord, and it's going to complete a feedback loop where there's an efferent action or a response where we withdraw our finger. Once again, this is automatic. We don't have to think about this. This is a great example of homeostasis. If we were to keep our finger on that candle, we would burn, degrade tissues, destroy tissue, and that's not to our advantage, right? So we need a method that we can detect harmful stimuli from our environment. If there's damage occurring here in the tip of your finger, there's going to be some nerves that mediate a reflex response, as you see here. And you can see this individual withdrawing their hand appropriately, right? And here's that image that we looked at in anatomy lab, in our histology component. It's an unmistakable nerve. The same organelles are going to be present in the soma, or the body of that nerve. So we see a nucleus, and we see this mesh looking area every which way. Those are microtubules, and there's cytosol in there, or cytoplasm. There's a cell membrane, of course, it surrounds everything. And then there's these extensions that we're going to come to know as dendrites, going out every which way. And there, you can think of those as like arms, hands reaching out every which way for stimuli, something to detect in the environment. All these little cells around this central neuron, those are support cells. We'll know those as glial or neuroglial cells. It's electric, boogie woogie woogie. So I know you guys have done that electric slide on a dance floor. So neurons are electrical. They exhibit this property of electrical excitability, and we are going to come to know that as the action potential. So the neural impulse, a nerve firing, these are analogous to the action potential. And we're going to study the action potential and talk about how it proceeds, slow the process down, how does it happen, and that's going to be in the coming slides. But so nerves, in their electrical activity, they're responsible for sensing, thinking, remembering, controlling, and regulating different things throughout the body. 3 parts. We've got the cell body, or the soma, with all those organelles. We've got the dendrites extending off like little tree branches here, and they're sensing things from within the environment. Then this long cord here, it's like analogous to a wire, that is the axon, and that is the wire down which the electrical impulse or action potential proceeds. Around that axon, we've got myelin, which is comprised of fat, and that is an insulator for the nerve impulse. At the far end of the axon, you'll find the terminal branches, and that's where the electrical impulse ends, and the information is transmitted to the next cell, organ, tissue, system. Here's a synapse. So this is the end of one of those terminal branches, and this is where the rubber meets the road. So this terminal bulb has got stuff in it, and that stuff is going to be released. The stuff is called a neurotransmitter. And neurotransmitter are chemical messengers that are released here in what's called the synaptic cleft. So on the other side of the synaptic cleft over here are going to be receptors, and when those neurotransmitters are received on that side, the message is as good as sent. And there's a whole cascade of events that occur once the action potential, draw a little electrical lightning bolt here. Once that electrical signal is sent to the end of this bulb, you see we've got mitochondria for energy, producing ATP. We've got these vesicles filled with neurotransmitters. As I'm going to discuss, the calcium must flood in when it receives that impulse, and these things go, they pop, neurotransmitters go across, and that's how we send messages. There's different types of neurons, and their shape is going to differ. You'd see that there's a different location of the cell body in each of these neurons, and you'll also see some other differences, that the axon does not have myelin on it. Those little beads, they're absent here. And so if I were to ask you which would be the fastest conducting, or among the fastest conducting nerves of these three, you would say it was one of these two, because they have the presence of the myelin sheath. They're thicker, they are faster, whereas this would be like a free nerve ending, which is notorious for transmitting pain. It's a little bit slower, and its relative lack of speed is due to the lack of myelin. There are different types of nerves. Okay, we've got information coming into the body, and I always like to think of that as our five senses. So we've got taste, we've got touch, we've got smell, we've got hearing, and there's one more I can't think of at the moment. But we take information in via the sensory nervous system, and that information is called afferent. That's coming in. And then information also goes out. You can see that depicted in the red, and that's referred to as efferent, or efferent. I say efferent. Afferent and efferent are sensory and motor, respectively. And then there are even other neurons that kind of play the middleman between sensory and motor. They're like relay stations that are going to receive information and send it elsewhere. Neuroglia are far more numerous than the nerve cells or neurons themselves. So here the neuron is in the center, at center stage, this yellow-orange structure, and that's going to be doing its thing. But all around it, it needs support players. So if this is the quarterback or the forward, whatever your choice of sport there, say it's a quarterback of the nervous system, there are all these little support players, that offensive and defensive line, different cells that play different roles. Some clean up the area, gobble up bacteria and other waste products. Others are going to feed the nerve. Astrocytes are notorious for that. They'll provide food for the nerve. Others are going to wrap around the axons in the form of myelin. And others are going to produce that cerebrospinal fluid, right, that the nervous system is bathed in. Most notably, the brain and the spinal cord are surrounded by cerebrospinal fluid. Let's talk about astrocytes. They're a type of glial cell. They're shaped like stars. They feed the neurons by providing glucose. And glucose, as we know, is broken down in turn into adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. And so that's going to be the fuel for these nerves functioning. These are like little gas stations right here. And then the microglia. These are small cells, small round cells that blow up like big Pac-Man or Ms. Pac-Man. And what they do is they gobble up junk. So they're like the trash guys who take out the garbage, these microglia. Little Pac-Man cells that gobble up bacteria and trash, and they bring it to the dump. Waste removal. Okay, and ependymal cells. These, as we discussed in lecture, they're kind of like epithelial cells. So we see, I would say it would be like a simple columnar epithelium with cilia sticking up on the top there. and the central nucleus in purple, and then connective tissue underneath, etc. So ependymal cells, they produce fluid called CSF, or cerebrospinal fluid. And the brain and the spinal cord are bathed in CSF, or cerebrospinal fluid. So it's really, really important to keep the brain tissue moist, just like the rest of our anatomy and physiology. In fact, life on Earth requires water. So ependymal cells are going to produce that CSF, very important. There are also certain neuroglia that produce myelin, which is the fat insulation. You can see these different layers, and this is a myelin sheath, an example of a myelin sheath. In the central nervous system, which we will come to understand is the brain and spinal cord, there is a support cell called the oligodendrocyte. Whereas in the peripheral nervous system, in your arms and legs, or outside of the central area, they're termed Schwann cells. And what these cells do, regardless of their location, they wrap up the axons of the nervous system. They bundle them together so that they conduct better. And here's an example here of that bundling up of nerve fibers, all these parallel segments here. These are axons, nerve fibers, and this is the oligodendrocyte or Schwann cell nucleus. And all these little projections are wrapping around, hugging the nerves, protecting them, and making them large diameter, fast conducting cells. White and gray matter, at a glance, are just that. So we can see the exterior areas of the brain and the spinal cord are darker when we stain them, when we look at them in sections. These are cross sections. This would be a coronal section right here, and this is a cross section of the spinal cord. And you can see that the central area here is darker. That's gray matter. Gray matter is comprised of cell bodies. So this is where, like, the brains, all the important stuff is at. This is where we know that in the nucleus of the standard cell, that is where protein synthesis takes place. That's where the genetic material is. So these are like the individual brains of the nervous system are found within the gray matter. And all the white matter, those are axons going every which way, bundles of nerve fibers that are wrapped in myelin. So you got to remember the difference, be able to differentiate white from gray matter. Very important. The organization of the nervous system, we're gonna cover this in sequence, but suffice it to say that we have the central nervous system, which is comprised of the brain and the spinal cord, and then the peripheral nervous system is everything else. All right. So there are sensory neurons. We're going to know them as afferent, and motor neurons efferent. And even among those, the motor neurons, we break them up into the somatic nervous system nerves, which power the body, your voluntary movements like skeletal muscle, getting you around, squeezing your beach muscles, and the autonomic nervous system, which controls things involuntarily. So you're like your reflex response touching that candle, that would be an autonomic nerve that mediated that. And among that, the autonomic nervous system, there's a sympathetic and parasympathetic, or fight or flight and rest and digest. Cool little graphic depicting the brain as a computer circuit. So remember that the brain is obviously the hub. This is the computer processor that we all possess, and it's very, very important for its ability to integrate information, to take in information and process it and decide on an action. Central nervous system, brain, and spinal cord. The spinal cord is depicted as like a big power cord here, because remember that there's going to be information coming in that cord, and there's going to be information from the brain. Once it's been processed, it's going to head out. afferent and efferent, once again. The brain is one of the largest organs in adults. It consists of 100 billion neurons, so really countless neurons, and about the same number of support cells that are around it, making sure it can carry out all its activities. Weighs about 1.4 kilograms or 3 pounds. Told you about that Russian guy that had a 4-pound brain, 4.5-pound brain. He's long gone, but smart guy, we can assume. The ability to process things was enhanced. The central nervous system is going to include nerves which begin and end with the brain or the spinal cord. And we, as discussed, everything outside of the brain and spinal cord is the peripheral nervous system. The spinal cord is going to extend from the foramen magnum, right at this area here. We know that area of the skull through, and this is the brain stem up here. And then the cord is going to extend all the way down to about your second lumbar vertebrae, after which there's going to be nerves that hang down, extend even from that. And my analogies with the brain being not the hard drive, although information is stored in the brain, but the computer processor. It's not very easy to write on this. So the brain is the computer processor, spinal cord as the circuit board, and the individual nerves as wires. An illustration on spinal cord injuries at different location. The higher the injury in the spinal cord, for instance, right at the brain stem here, around your 7th cervical vertebrae. If you injure anything above that, all this in the red, it's lights out. Okay, it doesn't work. There's not information coming in, and there's no information going out. So therefore, you have no power in everything below the shoulders here. Not fun. It was like Christopher Reeves. He was the Superman, original Superman, right? So fell off a horse and injured himself. In fact, we all know currently, or maybe perhaps will know somebody who's had an injury into their cervical spine, and it's crazy. It's unfortunate. So C4, basically from the neck down. A little bit lower in the cervical spine, from the shoulders down. In the mid-back, this is about T6 right here. If you sever the spinal cord there, then it's going to be from basically your thorax down. And if there is an injury at the level of L1, it's everything below the waist. So I thought that this was an interesting, although unfortunate, illustration of the importance of the central nervous system. With this being your computer processor, the brain, all the information is taken in and acted upon there. If the information can't get in other words, if that power cord is broken anywhere along the way, or if it's not directly severed or completely broken, then there can be different grades of injuries that can result in varying degrees of loss of function. But the implications are significant, so we need to really protect our central nervous system. In the peripheral nervous system, we've got some illustrations here of all these nerves that are just skin deep. I mean, these are underneath the skin. They're within muscles, coursing, flossing throughout, between each rib, down through the neck, through the shoulder, down the arm, forearm, and hand, through the butt cheek. There's a famous nerve down here that's called the sciatic nerve, which is a combination of a bunch of nerves which then break down into smaller branches and power all the muscles of the lower extremity, bring information in, sending information out, mostly to the muscles to help us walk. And so these are referred to as the spinal nerves and the cranial nerves. They perform all kinds of different functions, and they are everything outside brain and spinal cord. Of the peripheral nervous system, as mentioned earlier, we have the somatic nervous system, and here we've got a picture of a leg with muscles pulling on bones. So the somatic nervous system is going to be responsible for locomotion. Muscles pulling on bones are powered by nerves, somatic branch of the peripheral nervous system. Whereas all these other structures here, do we need to think about breathing? No. Do we need to think about our heart beating or our pancreas secreting insulin or digestive enzymes? No. Do we need to think about digesting our food and coursing it through the intestines? Negative. So the autonomic nervous system is going to automatically perform all these functions for us. And that's a branch of our peripheral nervous system. So it's pretty easy. It looks complex when you have all these different diagrams, branches of the nervous systems, etc., etc. But if I ask you, the musculoskeletal system is powered by which branch of the peripheral nervous system? The correct answer would be somatic, because soma means body. Somatic nervous system, you'll remember this image, that it's going to be muscles pulling on bones, powered by nerves. Correspondingly, if I ask you which branch of the peripheral nervous system permits your heart to beat, you'll say the autonomic nervous system. Afferent and efferent. Talked about that already. Let's do it again. This is a little chunk of your skin, right? And we know that there are those various corpuscles or little structures in there. They're sensory organs that are just skin deep, and they're going to transmit pain and temperature. They're going to detect if there's pressure or vibration to the skin, and those nerves contained within the skin, which is our largest organ, so there's a whole lot of them, is going to send information via the afferent branch of the nervous system into the spinal cord, and then it's going to be processed here in the gray matter, where there are lots of cell bodies, and it's going to be sent back out. There's going to be information sent back out to the nerves. And of course, this is our candle analogy, right? Where individuals sensing that the skin is being burned in this area and automatically sensing that in the spinal cord, a reflex results, and it's going to cause the bicep muscle to contract to withdraw the hand. Afferent and efferent pathways. And then there's the somatic and autonomic nervous systems, which power the muscles and glands, essentially organs, respectively. And that's your quick overview of the nervous system. Some key things to remember that I discussed over and over. There is organization within the nervous system. We've got the central and peripheral nervous systems. Nerves are electrical, boogie woogie woogie. The excited nerve or a nerve impulse is called the action potential. In our next slide presentation, we're going to discuss exactly how that happens. The action potential. Once the action potential reaches the end of a nerve, that's called a synapse. And within the synapse, neurotransmitters are going to be released. These send chemical messengers to the other side, and then receptors pick up that message, they receive it, and they act upon it. Have a good day.